Okay, good evening, everyone. We have a small group, but we're recording this and we'll make it available for other people to see as well. So tonight, the Justice Table is going to present the power and role of judges and how we can make intelligent choices about voting for a judge. Natalia Serrano is going to explain what the Justice Table is and is going to make a little presentation. Natalia grew up in Riverside, and she's an organizer for the Justice Table, and she's been dedicated to the community since she was a teenager. So, Natalia.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalia Serrano. As she was saying, I'm an organizer with the Justice Table. So a little bit of what the Justice Table does, it's a coalition of organizations that have come together with the purpose of district attorney accountability and public safety. So yeah, we've been operating since 2016, so this is our 6th year. Thank you. Okay, so the role and power of judges in the criminal legal system. Go ahead on to the next slide. Okay, so what role does a judge play? What does a judge do? County judges interpret state and local laws. Judges hand out penalties to those convicted of crimes and rule on civil disputes. Generally speaking, juries, not judges, hand out verdicts and determine factual disputes that can arise in a trial. Judges are the ones who determine bail amount, and judges do play a role in hearing and deciding unlawful detainers and evictions. Next slide. On jury trials, both civil and criminal cases, it is the jury's duty to decide the facts. The judge instructs the jury on the principles of the law. The jury's decision is made on evidence introduced and is usually final. We have bench trial. Bench trials are trials where the judge alone decides innocence or guilt on the sentences to be passed. A person can waive their right to a jury trial and have a bench trial instead. This happens in both criminal and civil matters. Next slide. How much power does a judge hold? Judges have the power to sentence individuals, sign off on all types of warrants, and that would be arrest, search, and bench, overturn convictions and jury's verdicts, punish misconduct occurring within a courtroom, including attorney sanctions, punish violations of court orders, and enforce orders to compel a person to do or refrain from doing something. Now, next slide. Here we have a little bit of a visual graph of the levels of a California state court system. So first we have the county court system, but each county has a superior court where criminal and civil trials take place. And then next we have the Court of Appeals. These courts review cases appealed from county courts if one of the parties wants to protest the decision. And then on the highest, we have the Supreme Court. This is the top court in the state with 7 judges called the Justices. It has the final decision on cases that have been appealed from lower courts. What to look for in a candidate for a judge? So one thing you would want to look for is who is endorsing the candidate. Now, it's important to review the candidate's endorsements as that tends to be a reflection on their values. This information can be found on Ballotpedia, which is a website, or other websites that are similar to it on the internet. For example, if they're endorsed by law enforcement, which can be sheriffs or district attorneys, they may be partial to decide in favor of law enforcement or against more restorative justice options. Who is funding the candidate? which is another important question to ask when looking for candidates or trying to decide a candidate. Where is the money and support for their campaign coming from? Some examples would be small businesses, corporations, lobby associations, community donations, labor unions, and things from that matter. Like mentioned above, what candidates are more partial in the institutions and donors that have helped their campaigns? Are there any political action committees involved? So their credentials, what to look for in the candidates for judges. Where have they worked in the past? Were they public defenders? Did they work for the district attorney's office? Were they part of a private firm or a public interest organization? Another question to ask would be, what do they do or what have they done in the community? So have they been active in the community? Things of that matter. So who are the Riverside County's candidates for the judge? First, we have Natalie Lowe, a deputy district attorney with a proven track record of supporting the death penalty, endorsed by District Attorney Mike Hestron and Sheriff Chad Bianco. And we have her ballotpedia right here. And then we have Amy Zois Barajas. Amy is a candidate for the Superior Court judge in Riverside County, and she is currently sitting in the seat 4. She was raised in Riverside, and Amy currently serves the county as a senior gang and homicide prosecutor with the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. She is also endorsed by Mike Hestron.
And those are the only 2 people running for judge in Riverside County.
Yes, those are the only candidates that we have.
What is the power of one vote?
What is the power of one vote?
What is the power of one vote?
Some elections are determined by one vote or the narrowest of margins.
In 1920, one vote in a last-minute decision ratified the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, giving women the right to vote.
In the most recent Boston City Council election, there was a runoff that was decided by a single vote.
History is replete with examples where one vote matters.
What is the power of one vote?
Voting energizes a culture of civic engagement.
Civic engagement is really the glue that holds communities and whole societies together.
Once people vote, they're more likely to learn about what's going on in their communities and take other forms of civic action.
What is the power of one vote?
Voting in local elections is a building block, making change possible for your neighbors and your community.
It's in local elections that some of the most important decisions affecting all of our lives are decided and made.
People absolutely underestimate the value of local elections.
Whether that's impacting the air you breathe, the streets you are walking and driving on, the schools that you and your family are going to, there's so much change and impact that can happen from voting in a local election.
What is the power of one vote?
When you vote, you're also representing those who can't vote.
Not everyone can vote, and you should vote to protect their interests.
They can remind us of the importance of voting, our responsibility to vote, and the difference it can make.
Some people aren't able to make it to the polls. Some people are not eligible to vote. And so really thinking about, what policies would be best for our community overall.
The power of one vote is the power to have a seat at the table in decisions that are being made about you, the people you care about, and the communities that you're a part of.
One vote is powerful because it binds you to your neighbors, to your family, to your friends.
It's each of our responsibility to vote. You've got to do your part, and one vote is the one thing that you control.
With your vote, you stand up and are counted. With your vote, you can turn the tide. With your vote, you change the direction of your community. That's the power of your vote.
Yeah, the power of community, the power of voting, very important. So the next slide, we have the election of judges, which takes place during local elections. Local judges are elected into office every 6 years. On November 8th of 2022, Superior Court judges will be voted on. Every 2 years, there are judges on the ballot. Next group of judges will be up for election in 2024, which is in 2 years. Voter registration information for this election is in person at voting locations on election day, November 8th, and online to register would be October 24th by 11:59 p.m. and by mail postmarked by October 24th. So vote with your values. Make sure you have all the information and vote with your values. Choose candidates committed to racial justice. Choose candidates who will pursue pretrial justice. Choose candidates who will treat kids like kids and keep families together. Choose candidates who are for restorative approaches and community involvement. Choose candidates who aim to decrease the scope of the criminal legal system and incarceration. Choose candidates who will not be opposed to overseeing misconduct by law enforcement. We have resources for community. We have the website Ballotpedia. We have https://ballotpedia.org. We have the Riverside County Register of Voters. So that would be www.voteinfo.net. The Voters Edge, votersedge.org/ca. And Follow the Money of www.followthemoney.org. Now we have our final slide and contact information, our social media. You have my email address right there, natalia.startingoverinc@gmail.com. If anybody wants to reach out or has any questions or is interested in being more involved in the justice table. We do have a community mailer list where we send out, events of calls of actions in the community or anything urgent going on in the community, any news. We have our Facebook, which is facebook.com, the Riverside Justice Table. And we have our Instagram, which is the Riverside Justice Table. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Natalia. By the way, I did not introduce myself at the beginning. I'm Rabbi Suzanne Singer. I'm the rabbi of Temple Bethel, which is where this forum is taking place. And we're very happy to have all of you here. Voting is really important, and that's something I just like to stress because that's where we have the power to make change. So Luis Nolasco is the community organizer with the ACLU down here, and he's going to take some questions.
Yeah, so you heard that wonderful presentation by Natalia. There was a lot of content and information, so we will send out the slides if you registered. Well, we're going to open it up for questions and a discussion. I think obviously the way that I digest information is talking about the information versus just, pretending that, you show something to me and it's going to retain, right? So that's kind of what we hope to have with you all today. So we'll open it up for questions. I know I don't know if there's any questions on Zoom. Feel free to put them on the chat. Unmute yourself, or folks here want to ask any questions.
My name is Ramos. I'm a community organizer and student here in Riverside. And my question was in regards towards funders and super PACs specifically. And I wanted to ask, what interest would people holding like those amounts of funds, what interest do they have in electing a county judge to see what they would do?
Okay, so and we can always ask other experts on this, but I think one thing that we noted on there is PACs, right? So they're called political action committees. The best way to describe it, and folks feel free to say, chime in if I'm not describing it properly, but it's just like a sort of a specific tax structure to donate a lot of money to candidates. That's like the least confusing way to explain it. And you usually associate PACs with like special interests. So for example, like big oil, right? They have a bunch of super PACs and PACs just because of how much money they have. And I think the reason, and that's why we say follow the money and see if there's any PACs involved, is just because, you know, in short term, I think candidates are, whether you like it or not, I think to some extent, most candidates, especially the ones in the criminal legal system, are indebted to their donors, right? So, you know, for example, you see a lot of donations from the district attorney or the sheriff, and the people funding a lot of those positions are the sheriff's association, right? So it's a sort of cycle of like, I scratch my back, you scratch yours. And unfortunately, that's kind of how it works in the criminal legal system, at least with a lot of these positions. So judges, sheriffs, district attorneys, right? So I think that's why it's always important to see, is there any PACs involved? How much money is being spent? You know, some statistics, right? This past in Riverside County, we had a district attorney race in June 7th that ran. And, you know, the incumbent district attorney, Mike Estrin, for example, had up to $1 million fundraised. A lot of that came from law enforcement associations. So in a way, you know, I think it's clear that Mike Estrin, right, will be indebted to law enforcement unions and their wants and needs. And that's why we also have never seen, except for one situation, DA Mike Estrin prosecute any cops, right? I think it's been one situation, but out of the hundreds of cases that have come up, it's only been one. So I think that paints a picture, and same for judges, right? So I can imagine that, you know, judges are going to be more favorable towards law enforcement if they get a lot more donations versus, say, a public defender or a, you know, private defense attorney.
Thank you very much.
Do you have any other questions, Ramos?
Too many.
Too many? Are there any? Oh, here. So Myrtle Foster is asking, what is the purpose of the justice table? Is the function to serve as a watchdog?
Well, yeah, good question. And Suzanne, you can also chime in as a member. I think it's in a way, it's just to kind of bring people together, bring organizations together that are interested in changing the criminal legal system here in Riverside, and make sort of our voice heard. You know, I think for far too long, our county sort of has relied on incarceration as a solution. And, you know, I think that's just not the way to go. Incarceration is costly, it's inhumane. You know, we can go on days and days with the problems of incarceration and keeping the status quo, right? And so I think our coalition in particularly is looking at the whole mass incarceration problem, but through the district attorney lens. I think there's a lot that you can do, you know, tackling jails, sheriffs, judges. Well, we're tackling judges today, right? But our bread and butter as a coalition is taking on prosecutors and district attorney accountability, because I think district attorneys are some of the most powerful entities in the whole system, right? They decide who gets charged, whether to drop charges, if you go to diversion, how long you're going to be sentenced. So that's our focus, and that's what we want to do, right? And continue educating the community about all of these players and ensuring that, you know, like you all here today, right, are hearing this very important information, because I don't think a lot of these positions are often not talked about. And if they are, like, it's only very, very little information that gets put out. And so we want to continue to increase this accountability and oversight of these elected officials and provide that information to the public.
Are there any other questions on Zoom? And if not, Ramos, go ahead. I know you have other questions.
I've got a question.
Okay, please.
The ballot pamphlets that we were sent before the, I think the June election, had very little information about the judges.
Exactly.
There's no statements from the judges themselves. What you can see is who's endorsing them. And that's about all you have to go on. I don't know whether there some, I don't know what the reluctance is to get more information from them or offer them more of a platform to say something.
Right.
It was
Well,
very inadequate.
Sorry, yeah, that's exactly why we wanted to hold this forum, is to say, okay, there are resources to find out more information. If you go to Ballotpedia, if you go to some of these other websites that Natalia mentioned, there is more information out there. It just doesn't happen to be in the material that's sent out. I don't know why that is. Do you happen to know, Luis, why they don't send out more?
It might be just, I believe everything that gets placed on your ballot, it's information that the candidates themselves submit to the register of voters. So it might very well just be that they feel like they don't need an introduction and that their name alone is enough to get them the position. And unfortunately, I mean, speaking for myself and a lot of the family, they always skip over the judge section when they get to their ballot, right? And so they're always coming to me like, oh, who do I vote for judge? And I'm always like, well, this is what you should look out for, right? And so another thing, right? We can't tell you how to vote. We can just share, like, vote with your values, vote with some of the stuff that we shared up here. But yeah, everything that's on the ballot is what the candidates have themselves shared with the register of voters. So that's why it's always super important to like just cross-reference everything, right? Just because a candidate submits something to the register, that shouldn't be enough, right? You should always do your own additional research on that. So look up the candidate, see where they've worked, what's their experience. Are they, a seasoned politician? Is this their first term running? Have they worked for, a public interest organization, or, are they coming from the corporate world? What is their background, right? Like, what is those qualifications? See where they're getting their funding from. Are they basically running a campaign from community dollars? Is it just like a lot of donations from labor unions? Like, it's just important to do all that additional information, especially for some of these candidates that maybe don't have a lot of information. I think obviously like supervisors or state senator, or president, like there's a lot of information publicly available, but for these smaller ones, it can be a little bit harder to find info, but that's where we encourage you to do that research, right? And some of the websites that we provided, especially Ballotpedia, that's a really great resource. And then also the register of voters. So even if in the ballot there was nothing that you saw, there should be more additional information about each candidate on the register of voters. So there is an intent to file form, and there might be some information there. So again, I encourage you to check out the Riverside County Register of Voters website, because there are some statements from candidates there often, but also Ballotpedia.
Okay, Ramos.
My next question, I have been a resident of Riverside County for approximately 1 year. So I'm not quite familiar with the history of Mike Hestron. If somebody would be able to inform me on some of his previous rulings and how that has shaped Riverside County in itself.
Okay, well, I think that might be the next follow-up meeting. Mike Hestron 101. Yeah, I think short story, and I think it's also important, I think, for folks to understand too, that it's not just an individual problem, right? So it's nothing, we don't have anything personal against each individual district attorney or current district attorney or anything. It's more of an institutional problem that continues to carry on these issues. So Hestron is just a sort of piece in that legacy of Riverside County being just, relying on incarceration. So some of the things worth noting, for example, the county's reliance on incarceration. So one of the ways that they do this is just overly taxing people with sentences. And what I mean by this, there's things called sentence enhancements, right? So, for example, if you're assault someone and then you have a weapon, because you have a weapon, there could be a sentence enhancement added to that. And so, one practice that we've noticed, community here has noticed for Riverside, is that they try to add on a sentence enhancement whenever they can. And the reason why they do this is because that's how much they can get more time out of a person that way, right? So they love sending people to prison in the county. Issues with, not sharing all the information to, the public defenders, which are called Brady violations. That's been another common thing that happens here. The death penalty is a big one, right? I think Riverside, I'm trying to get the correct years. I think it was 2015, up to 2015, Riverside was up there in terms of sentencing and sending people to the death penalty. And that number didn't stop. So it sort of continued with Lancaster. And now I think Riverside, up until LA, was the second highest county of sending people to death row in the state of California. To so much so, we sent so many people to the death penalty here in Riverside County that even national organizations and organizations working on the death penalty nationwide have identified Riverside County as a problem. So that's how bad it is here, y'all, and how much of a reliance it is in this system here. And so those are just some of like the top level things, right? We can talk day in and night of different policies and what they're not doing. But I think it's an institutional problem, right? And so it won't go away, if Heshran leaves. It's more so just a whole system problem, right? It's the district attorney's office altogether as sort of perpetuating this problem.
Any other questions on Zoom? Anybody out here would like to ask? Do you have another question, Ramos? Go right ahead.
Yeah, I might as well. Okay. In regards towards the district attorney's office and their role in playing in criminal prosecution, how can, and if this is a space to discuss Derek Schoff, how has the district attorney played a role within sentencing in situations like with Derek Schoff, where, as Luis mentioned before, they tacked on so many different charges and so many different claims that they were eventually able to tack on a life sentence towards him, and how everything leading up to that trial, because I went to the trial for the days that I was available and go to it. And yeah, the district attorney's lawyer that was there was very visceral and very gunning for incarceration, when that is the role of the district attorney, is to lead in for incarceration. So I guess I wanted to ask how like the influence of a new county judge will affect cases like Derek Schoff in the future.
Yeah, so the Derek Schoff case is just an ongoing case that has gotten support from the Justice Table and other community members of a young Black man that essentially had a crisis and sort of got caught up in the system because of a said crisis with his family, and now is potentially facing life in prison. And what is the judge's interaction there? So I think, I think there's always the role of the judge is also very important, right? Because they could very well disagree with the recommendations from the district attorney, right? So I think it's a three system representative. So it's a public defender, or your defense attorney, the DA, and the judge. And for example, it's not just the DAs. DAs are typically the ones that recommend bail, but it's not solely DAs, right? So DAs recommend bail, but judges can also set bail. So in the case for Derek, who has been incarcerated for almost 2 years, while pending his case, the judge could have very well said, hey, this case is bonkers, you can go home, no bail. So, they do have that power. They have the power of oversight. If the judges believe that there was misconduct, or maybe something racially biased by the DAs in terms of prosecuting, they could have also overturned that. And I think folks saw currently on the news, right, with Adnan Syed in the East Coast, right? So like those situations where there's, and that's a very different situation, but like if there was like misconduct and things like that, like the judges are able to overturn that and they hear those decisions. So, but that's just like a small snippet of the sort of power that judges have. I mean, it's equally, I think, important to focus on judges as it is district attorneys.
Right, and if they decide to not set bail, you know, they rely a lot of times on these sort of algorithms of, you know, where the person was living. Is this the kind of place where there's a lot of crime, in which case that person might not get bail? So they have a lot of discretion to impose bail. And obviously, if you can't pay bail or you don't get bail, you end up in jail and you can be incarcerated for a really long time waiting for a trial. And then what happens is people plea bargained just to get out, even if they're not guilty. And as we found out recently, in the last year, up until September, 13 people have died in our jails here. These are people who haven't necessarily been convicted of anything. So again, that's, you know, the district attorney and the judge will sort of together decide how they're going to, you know, adjudicate something like that, you know. And you see that the only two judges running right now in Riverside County have been endorsed by the district attorney and one of them by the sheriff as well. So what does that tell you? Unfortunately. Did you have a question? No? Anybody else?
I've got one more question.
Oh, good.
Are you concerned at all about the DA in Los Angeles and other DAs in major metropolitan areas that have gone kind of pretty far on the other side of letting repeat offenders go with no bail?
Yeah, well, actually, we had a session. How long ago was it that we had the session with Chesa Boudin? That was last summer. Okay, so we had a forum where he came and spoke, and he's the district attorney of San Francisco. And as you probably know, he was recalled. So the few sort of progressive DAs, one of which is in LA, one is in Philadelphia, there aren't a lot of them, have, you know, obviously run into a lot of controversy. And there's been recall efforts because there's fear of crime and, you know, it's a delicate balance. I think most district attorneys are more in the mold of Mike Hestron. Wouldn't you say that? Yeah. As I said, you know, the one who was different in San Francisco got recalled, and that was even in San Francisco, which is a very progressive city. LA, what's his name again? Yeah,
Gascon.
Yeah, he's obviously been controversial. The one in Philadelphia, I don't think has been quite as controversial as Gascon, but so yeah, I mean, there's always unintended consequences to any kind of reform or change, one way or the other. So
Well, this young man who was in jail or has been in jail for 2 years waiting for trial, what was he incarcerated for?
This is the one you were talking about before.
Well, I think it was just like I don't have all the full on details, right? It just, you can see what is available on public, right? But it's just, I think it was like, it was like a fight, right? And like threats and stuff like that. Like a lot of like, in a sense, it can be shortened to like civil dispute.
What was he facing? Is he facing a life term?
Yeah, so
Did anybody die in this fight?
No.
But he's facing a life sentence.
Mm-hmm.
What was the alleged crime?
It's like, I don't have, like I said, I don't have the whole rap sheet, right? But it was like 4 offenses, and then like each one had up to 2 to 3 sentence enhancements. So when you do the math, it's just like.
Is he a repeat offender?
Yeah. What was that?
Is he a repeat offender?
First offense.
And he's facing a life term?
It's also important to note that he's a young Black man, right? I think that's also a very important thing of the continued reality, right? Of like racial implications, right, of like, at least within the district attorney's office and the people that are sentenced, in Riverside County, I believe it's only 7% of the total population is, considered Black African American. But when you look at the number of, both misdemeanor and felony cases, I think they make up almost close to 14% of the cases being handled by the district attorney. And that is information that comes from public records requests that the ACLU put together and published a report. So, we can send you that report as well, which analyzes like what are the top offenses that the DAs is sort of prosecuting for, what is the demographic of people being sentenced, or what enhancements are used the most. So just like it analyzes a lot of this data that can help communities make a better informed decision about what's actually happening here.
Also, Natalia put in the chat that this gentleman was having a mental health crisis and nobody died or was injured. And unfortunately, this is not just in Riverside, but people who have mental health issues, a lot of them end up incarcerated rather than being treated. So that's really not, it's not really very effective to put someone in jail if they're mentally ill. One more question. Yeah, go ahead.
This isn't really a question. It's more if I can provide some clarity upon the Schoff case. So what happened in the event of the case and what brought it about was that there was an incident where he had a mental breakdown and was going through an altered reality state. And when the police interviewed the victim of what occurred and like how she witnessed it, it was his mother or family member. She was interviewed by the police and she didn't realize, and she was not informed that this was somebody who was being questioned so that they could incarcerate her son. I'm trying to remember the mother's name off the top of my head, but I have it on my phone. But what happened was she was unaware that the interview that was happening was going to be used against her son in the incarceration. So a lot of these police interrogations are usually made when they're collecting evidence. They're not informing the witness that they're being used. So when the court case was occurring, Derek Schoff's mother actually testified in favor of Schoff or in defense of him because she had been evaluated by a mental health professional in the courtroom itself. And it showed that she herself, when she was providing the information to the cop, was going through an altered reality state because she experienced flashbacks of trauma that she occurred within her life of 2 different incidences and how that triggered her and caused her to relive some of that trauma when she witnessed her son have this mental breakdown right in front of her, and how she had to just experience all of that stress all over again. The mental health professional literally said that it is a definite conclusion that she herself was going through an altered reality state and did not provide the police officer that interrogated her accurate information. And that's in the court files. Like that wasn't even like in the news or anything. This is what the judge and the bench trial heard, because it's a trial of his peers. And yeah, like that's what was happening when that happened. And everybody that was in the courtroom was able to see that the mother was like very much very stressed out during the incident. So that's all I got to say to that a lot of these cops that incarcerate these individuals really are not interested in supporting them through and de-escalating the situation. In fact, they would rather just use brutal force and just say they're guilty, throw them in jail, lock away the key, and that's the end of the story that they want to have. But that's why we're here, to have these discussions and bring about some form of action.
And just to close off, I think with the last point on that is just, I think the great point of Ray of like repeat offenders and sort of, I think the general public sort of concern, right, with people offending again, right? And I think it's also, when we're talking about crime, I think it's very important to look at the root causes of what is the source behind a lot of these things, or what is the root cause of the behaviors, right? And I think, speaking for Riverside, I cannot speak to LA because I don't organize in LA or interact with LA communities. But just speaking for Riverside, right? Like the recidivism rate, which is essentially the recidivism is like, what is the rate that a person's going to reoffend and go back to jail or prison? In Riverside County, it's about 60%. So I think California-wide, I think it's about 50%. In Riverside, it's a little bit higher. And why is it that people reoffend? Well, because, a lot of these people get caught up in the system, they do their time, they go to jail, they go to prison, they come home, and suddenly they have, especially for people that have felonies, they have a felony on their record. And now California got rid of some of these restrictions, but that stigma continues in terms of housing, employment, and just getting your life back together, right? So it's like you served 10, 15 years in prison, you rehabilitated, you took classes, you better yourself, right? You're like, I'm a changed man. I'm going to do better for myself and my family. You come home to Riverside and, you try to apply for a job. Nope, can't get one because you have a felony. Trying to look for housing. Nope, they all have crime-free housing, which is no felonies allowed. So you came back from prison, back to your community. You have no housing, no job, no transportation. Like, what do you expect people to do, right? Like people are in a way often reoffending because of sort of a necessity. Add on like substance use and mental health, and the picture becomes a lot more muddled. And until we can provide a lot of these resources and care and systems of care in Riverside, so expanding employment opportunities, expanding housing opportunities, which it's crucial thing here in Riverside. Like housing is a big topic, as we all know, and just resources that exist for people. I think that's a better solution than just incarcerating people or sending, quote unquote, repeat offenders back to jail, because that really doesn't solve the problem. They're going to go back to jail, they're going to serve their time, they're going to come back out, and you're just continuing the cycle of incarceration that really doesn't solve any of the trauma, any of the harm, or any of the sort of core issues behind what caused a person to commit a crime.
Well, Luis and Natalia, thank you so much for all this really great information. Ramos, thank you for your many questions. And Jory Yarmoff is doing the technical end of things, and we appreciate all his help and his psychedelic injection into what we're doing here. And we will make this recording available so others can find out more about judges. And we'll send out the resources to people who've registered for this as well. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.